Thanks. Today is the second in a series on COVID change and adaptive strategies in different business sectors. We started with business with Melly James, and we're going today with Vincent Kimura, CEO of Smart Yields, and Vincent Mina, the president of HFUU, the Hawaii Farmers Organization. I'm not going to take up time with intros. We're just going to head right into it. Vincent, with what COVID is doing and how it's impacting us, where are we? Where do we go from here? How do we get there? What are the most important things we need to understand and keep in mind?
Well, as a farming system, our agricultural system here in Hawaii is broken. I currently sit on the Hawaii Department of Agriculture. I'm president of Hawaii Farmers Union United, and I'm also a family farmer, co-owner with my wife, Irene. What we see is pivoting away from the hotels and restaurants, the need for aggregation and distribution of food. And so we're going to be touching on that with the slide presentation that we're going to be putting up. But basically, as a farmer, knowing that we need to just truly be able to react in a way that we're prepared. We hadn't been feeding the needy before this pandemic hit very well. So what makes people think that we're going to be doing it well now within the pandemic? So it's a matter of us addressing infrastructural components of our agricultural system that have long since been ignored.
Okay. Are there changes in the resources and relationships that are going to make that distribution work better?
Yeah, people are hungry. That always gets people's attention.
And Vince, are there models that we can look at that might provide guideways, pathways for us?
There are, Chuck, and I think part of the analysis and due diligence that we've been doing as a technology startup have been focusing on, what has been done historically, both locally, nationally, internationally, and how can we leverage those models and glean from the best practices? Because again, this is not something new. We've been working on these food systems issues for generations to come. So a lot of the ahas have been coming, especially from the Europeans, and a lot of those models have been integrated nationally across the mainland United States.
Where do we go from here?
Well, if you don't mind, we can bring up the slides and we can kind of walk through some of the data. So as Vince and I both sit on, well, I sit on the executive board for the Hawaii Farmers Union United. I'm also president of the Untitled Chapter. So next slide, please. This is actually a most recent picture from our last convention, showing you all the breadth of small farmers in Hawaii on Maui. Next slide. Hawaii Farmers Union United encompasses 13 chapters statewide. We just hit our 10-year anniversary, and we've got about 1,300 members statewide. Next slide. So in terms of data and what we're looking at here, the USDA reports that we have a little over 7,000 farms. The majority of those farms are family farms and sub 9 acres. Next slide. So when you think about data and you think about what farmers have been using to guide them through their annual process, things like the Farmer's Almanac are older. So every farmer we've talked to has basically said, we can't farm the way we've been doing it. Next slide. And as we all know, with changing climates, whether you call it climate change or not, things are very different. Next slide. We see precipitation changes considerably. Next slide. We see major issues related to lack of water or available resources. Next slide. We see drought hitting, especially California, in the most recent epidemic of challenges facing farmers. Next slide. We see, because of that lack of water, are higher concentrations of salt, which is really an issue, especially with soil health. Next slide. And of course, this trade war doesn't help this. So I think the one thing when we look about how COVID has enlightened us through this broken food supply chain this is evident of how we are resilient through these times. Next slide. And of course, the impact of climate change is going to be catastrophic, as we've been seeing it. Next slide. So here in home, we see, because of rising sea levels, that'll affect our aquifers. Next slide. And of course, as Vincent, Mina mentioned, food insecurity is first and foremost through both us locally, nationally, and internationally. Next slide. So because the majority of farms nationwide are small to medium sized by acreage. Next slide. And the data that we've been seeing nationally is that every dollar sold in the grocery store, only 9 cents of that dollar goes back to the farmer. So that's inherent of why the economic situation and models we've been using are broken. Next slide. So now what does that mean? Well, obviously, as we all know, education, much like how Confucius has always said, if you want to plan for 100 years, you've got to educate your youth. And that's really what the farmers usually are focusing on, is encouraging farmers to understand what regenerative agriculture looks like, that's resilient. And of course, ensure that those apprentices, as we call it in the FAM program, the Farmer Apprentice Mentoring Program, they're successful. Next slide. So the solution is really simple. It's, the state has wanted to double food production. Question is, well, how much food are we producing and what is the baseline to double? Next slide. And the solution that we've been focusing on has been something that's not new. Food hubs or food aggregation sites are universal. And Hawaii has at least 8 existing food hubs, many of them which are farmers union members and operators. And their impact has been great. So what we're suggesting and encouraging through a lot of the programs we've been implementing is, let's expand this. Let's make this a statewide program. Next slide. And as I mentioned on the impact, we've been able to support a lot of different support, especially from external funding coming into Hawaii. The impact in terms of emergency food distribution, as well as supporting for bulk purchasing for low income, SNAP, EBT, et cetera, is great. Next slide. And this is just a snapshot of an amazing food hub over on the west side of Oahu, Kahumana, that has been aggregating food from around their region to support both the west side of Oahu, but also the central Oahu. Next slide. And this is what we want to spend our time on. So if you think about our current food system and how we're moving food based on supply, logistics, et cetera, it's very limited, which is why we rely so heavily on imported food. Next slide. And this is what we propose and we're working on today, allowing farmers to aggregate through food hubs that are farmer owned, allowing them to have a greater seat at the table in terms of distribution, but also for a lot of those margins. Next slide. And of course, food safety is a very common theme, especially pre-COVID. So how do we increase that? How do we ensure that? Well, it's done through these food hub aggregation. And there's a great program called Group Gap that the North Shore EVP has been spearheading for the last 3 or 4 years. Next slide. And I'll pass it on to Vincent Mina to talk about this.
Okay, I can't see the slides, so I don't know why that is, but which slide's up there?
It's a picture of you and your farm.
Oh, okay. So we're making a living here on 2,500 square feet. Kahanuaina greens, we grow microgreens. And basically my wife, when she was pregnant with our little girl, was craving sunflower greens. And I wanted to farm for a living, but I thought I needed land and equipment. When here it turns out on our 9,000 square foot lot, we've created over the past 26 years on this postage stamp an ability to make a living at farming. And so it's not about the best thing that could ever happen in my passion to want to work the land and become a farmer was the fact that I was limited in space. And so I was able to then get creative and MacGyver our way forward to where we could actually make a living doing what we do on this space. Now, a big part of that component is that I'm limiting the amount of inputs that are, oh, excuse me, sorry. I'm limiting the amount of inputs that are needed on the farm because we recycle all the flats that we cut, all the flats of greens that are grown in a compost, I recycle all them back onto the farm to be reused again. So that really, that takes it to a whole different level as far as economics. And then we produce on that 2,500 square feet, on average 500 to 600 pounds of greens a week. And we have the infrastructure in place that we put in over the years because you see what's needing to be efficient, how to make efficient your operation. We can produce up to 1,000 pounds with the infrastructure that we have a week. So the point being is that people are managing too much land and they're not doing a very good job of it, where they have to use a lot of inputs to manage that land. And the reason why they're not doing a very good job of it for the most part usually is because they've been taught a paradigm that doesn't involve the life of the land, the health and vitality of the land. So that's what we've been about as far as Farmers Union, 13 chapters that have, for the most part, the majority of our presidents are producers. So this way, like Vincent was saying, you know, that it gets the farmer at the table and the voice of the farmer where it needs to be. So people who aren't farming for a living can be educated as to what it takes to make a living at farming.
Fantastic. Question.
Yeah. What's the next slide? Is there another slide that's up there? Or?
Yeah, we're going to talk about soil health and regenerative agriculture.
Good.
Okay. So Chuck, you had a question before that?
No, I'll hold that.
Okay.
So maybe I'll intro that, Vince.
Yeah, go ahead, Vince.
So this slide that we have up there is Da Vinci's quote, which is still relevant today. We know more about the movement of celestial bodies in the soil under our feet. Can you talk a little bit about, you know, as you said, you recompost and your system is a closed system, it's regenerative. Can you talk about that with the next slide?
Sure. What's the next slide showing?
It's the images of your IMO.
Oh, the IMO. Okay, so Master Cho came from Korea and taught us how to be able to culture indigenous microorganisms found underneath the leaf litter in the forest, and to take that indigenous microorganisms, culture it onto white rice, and then take that and stabilize it with brown sugar, so that this way we could take that indigenous microorganism marmalade, it looks like, mix it with water, and then and broadcast that into mill run of wheat. And what mill run of wheat is when they mill the wheat into flour, it's the outside shell, in a sense. It looks like sawdust that's left over from that milling process. Well, they're loaded, we got that tested, and they're loaded with biostimulants, meaning that when you put biology to it, the biology just flourishes on it. So what you see here is we're making IMO 3, it's called. And that's the indigenous microorganisms that have been cultured onto that mill run of wheat. And we do it on top of a bed of biochar. And the reason why we do that is, and you'll see the next slide that has, if I'm correct, it looks like the mill run of wheat and then the black biochar on the bottom, and you see the white fuzzy. Is that the slide that's up, Vince?
Correct.
Okay. That particular, I call that a biochar cookie. That is what's found at the bottom of that pile that you saw earlier, when the microorganisms are literally gluing themselves to the biochar. Now the biochar here is charcoal. You know, when you have cooking charcoal and you get it on your hands, it's real oily, yeah? Well, this is charcoal that has all the oils cooked out of it. So all you're left with is that structure. And this is kiawe wood too. So being kiawe, it's a really hard wood and it holds the structure. So if you took it microscopically, it looks like condominiums for the microbes, places for the microorganisms to go in and inhabit, where moisture can go in there and inhabit. So it gives an ability of structure. So those microorganisms are going into the biochar. We mix that biochar with the mill run of wheat. Then we take that, when it's completely done its process of cooking, it gets up to 120 degrees in one day, and after 7 days it cools down. We then take that, put it on soil as hard as the counter that I'm sitting at. We lay that down, lay mulch on top of it. Within a couple weeks, my finger can go through the soil. So basically what that does is it opens up the soil to allow the microflora to develop. And when the microflora develops, then you have a vehicle for plant roots to go down inside, tap into existing minerals that are there in the soil that the roots can't get access to because the roots are too big, but the microflora roots can. So the microflora roots go in, grab a hold of those minerals, bring it back to the plant roots. The plant roots goes, great, fungus roots. I have proteins and sugars that I've gotten through photosynthesis from the sun that I'm going to give to you, which is like cookies and ice cream. I'm going to give you that cookies and ice cream, and you're going to give me, in symbiosis, the minerals. So it creates this wonderful relationship between the body of the soil and the plants.
Vince, I'm so glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, what I've been hearing, oh, sorry, 1 second. What I've been hearing is, because the cost of farming and the inputs required has caused you to create your own substrate, your own soil. Because of course, one of the biggest challenges we have in terms of increasing food production is that inputs.
Right.
Can you talk about that a little bit more, and then as to the economic impact, but also, expound that into the whole body and soil concept?
Yeah, well, that's why I was setting the table at our farm in the beginning, is because on a microcosm, we're living that on our farm. I was spending $200 every 8 days on soil media to grow our microgreens, and piling these cut trays up, trying to use it, couldn't use it. It wasn't working out until I got soil tests done to show the imbalance that was in that compost and what I needed to add to it. When I added to it and created that balance, boom, all that, the $200 every 8 days went away. And then I was just putting like 75 milligrams per 4 cubic feet of compost and balancing the soil. And now we just recycle and reuse our soil. So we've saved all that money over the years in inputs. And what's going on with conventional agriculture today is, and this goes back to World War II, when after World War II, there was all this anhydrous ammonia from Korean War, from Vietnam War. They would use this to go in and defoliate areas so where they can land planes on. Because when you put high, anhydrous ammonia is real high in nitrogen. When you put high nitrogen into the soil, it drives out the calcium. Well, guess what happens when you drive out the calcium from your own body? Osteoporosis, right? Well, it's the same thing for the soil. You have to have calcium saturation in the soil for the soil to be open and flocculated to where roots can get down inside. So overuse of anhydrous ammonia has caused us big problems in agriculture. But when it first came into vogue, when people started using anhydrous ammonia, farmers, they thought it was great because the plants just jumped out of the ground and they were nice and green. But the problem was, because there was no calcium in the soil, they were weak and bugs came in. Okay, that's when the infestations came in. So what happens? The farmer goes back to the same company that he bought the anhydrous ammonia from, and they go, oh yeah, no problem. We got these pesticides that you can use. So all of a sudden, conventional farmers became drug addicts, basically, because they had to keep going back to these chemical companies to get their crops rescued. Now them chemicals have created quite a havoc, not only in the soil, in the sense that they're killing off, because of the high salt content, they're killing off that microflora that I was talking about earlier that we're building up. But they also are giving us humans incomplete proteins in the food. Looks like a cucumber, tastes like a cucumber somewhat, but it doesn't give us that nutrient density our bodies need, the receptor sites our bodies need to be able to be well. And so it's created a bunch of unhealthy people on this planet. If you look at Zach Bush's presentation, you YouTube him, he articulates it very well under Farmer's Footprint. And it's a situation to where we really are destroying ourselves because we're not creating the food that will keep the population well.
No. Exactly, and there are probably other areas, for example, microbial solutions that can provide not only soil nutrients, but reduce soil salinity, soil contamination, things like that. Any work with the College of Trop Ag here and others?
Yes, I sit on the board of the Department of Agriculture with Dean Comerford from CTAR, and it's really great having conversations with him. We're working on at the department level. I would sit with Randy Cabral, who's the president of Farm Bureau. We're working through that level to develop what I ideally would like to see is a cover crop seed industry occur throughout the state. So we can provide cover crop seed to our farmers, and with the cover crops, that will rebuild the soil biology. That like for instance, when I go out in the sun with my bald head, if I stay out in the sun too long, I get burned up, right? So the earth always wants to cover itself. It never wants to be bare. And what happens is, well, we can't let it cover itself because it's going to send weeds up. The reason why it sends the weeds up is because there's an imbalance in the microflora. The weeds are always there to balance things out. And so we've kind of lost touch with the reality of why things happen the way they happen. And we think we know better than nature. Go figure. And when nature goes, hey, I'll give you all the rope you want to either pull yourself up or hang yourself. Well, obviously, we've been hanging ourselves agriculturally.
Vince brought up a really interesting perspective, and Dr. Zach Bush, which is one of the slides there, he's this amazing individual who's been focusing on taking his medical research and seeing trends in what's been happening both on the human biome side, so what's happening with us as Vince mentioned, the microbiome, but also in regards to how that's affecting food supply, cancer rates are increasing, all of these different things. And as Vince mentioned too, if you haven't watched this video that he has called Farmer's Footprint, it's pretty eye-opening in terms of how farmers are changing the way they've been doing things, have been taught for the last 2 generations, and doing things more resilient, more regenerative. And we see this happening a lot with a lot of our farmers within the Farmers Union, is the practices that we've been taught were, again, very limited because it was for large-scale production. How we're seeing the biodiversity of things. Yeah, please.
Just to speak to what you're sharing there, is I have a deep respect for all farmers, conventional or not, and the reason why, they were taught a certain way because the reason why the chemicals are supposedly to help things is to get them a living wage. Farmers, like Vince said earlier, 9 cents per dollar, that is ridiculous. We're one of the 3 commons: food, air, and water. The 3 commons. Well, food, people want it as cheap as they can get it. They feel like it's part of the commons. Why should I even pay for food? Why should I pay for clean air? Why should I pay for water? It's part of being a human being. I need those things to survive. Well, we as a human race kind of lost touch with the fact that, yeah, I get it. It's a business. Okay. But you know what? It's an essential service to our community to keep them well. Yeah. And to not have our children growing up with type 2 diabetes and just being couch potatoes with their video games and not really being productive in their own lives, not having any, I was at a talk one time, and a lady questioned the presenter about his assertion that the carbon that people are eating in corn are because of the high sugar levels are affecting their ability to be productive. And the lady said to them, she debated that. She said, these kids just need to get off the couch. They need to go exercise. And he said to her, yeah, I understand what you're saying. What you're talking about is insulin, or no, what you're talking about is estrogen. What trumps estrogen is insulin. In other words, these kids are so unhealthy because of the spikes in insulin, they can't get up and exercise. So it's really an important thing to know that we have to be able to healthy food, gives you the ability to make healthy decisions, and so it's as simple as that. And I'm not getting into any kind of a religion or philosophy here. This is based on results. I'm 66 years old now. I'm still farming, and I feel like I can farm for another 10 years the way I'm doing it, and eat healthy, and really value the idea that we don't have to beat up the soil we don't have to beat up the environment in order to create abundance. As a matter of fact, the complete opposite. The more we're in relationship with our environment, the more we're collaborative and cooperative with our environment, the more abundance will come to us.
And you just raised a really important point, Vincent, and that is, studies show indisputably 75–80% of our health is what we ingest. Food, liquid, air. that stuff. Maybe 20, 25% for super health buffs from the exercise and that stuff. That being the case, why are we not putting 75 to 80% of our resources, research, development, funding, support, education, into farming and food production and the links between them? It's insane.
0.4%. Our state budget is 0.4% for agriculture. When I tell people, when I ask them, what do you think our state budget is? I'll get answers like 10%, 15%, because they kind of see it's a loaded question, you know? So they're thinking, I'll go low. I'll go 10 to 15%. 0.4%, less than 0.5%. The state legislature thinks agriculture is of value to us here in Hawaii.
Yeah, makes no sense. Vince.
Doesn't. Makes no dollars and cents either, you know, because this is the only resilient industry when this pandemic has occurred. What, 230,000 people out of work? Our farm just continued. It's like, okay, you know, I like the roads are all empty. You know,
not only that,
the road,
farming and food are the only industry that might give us a pathway, exactly as Vince indicated earlier, to stability, sustainability, and more equality. If we don't build those three things, we're going to be back with the next disaster worse off than we are now. And we know it's coming.
Just think of a hurricane hit. Yeah, just think of a hurricane hit during this pandemic. Wow, what that would have been like. And that can happen very easily, right?
We're 4 months from flu season and more COVID. COVID's not gone. We have no vaccine. We have no preventive. It'll be back. We know it.
Yeah, Chuck, and I'm of the ilk that no vaccine is going to, in other words, it's the same mentality that, you know, if you have a weed, spray Roundup. You can't, nature doesn't work like that. Nature will just go, you know what, I guess you didn't really hear me, so let me turn up the volume a little bit, you know. And nature continues to turn up the volume. We can't look to reinvent nature. Nature's innately astute in the sense that that innate intelligence of nature. We only know 5%, like Vincent showed in the slide earlier. We only know 5% of what goes on underneath the soil. You think we would put resources to learning about the other 95%. There's a great movie called Fantastic Fungi. Please, everybody, check out that movie. Check out that movie.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah. Paul Stamets is doing amazing work.
I think to wrap up here, yeah, go ahead, sorry, Chuck.
Vince, where do we go from here? What do we need to prioritize first and most?
Well, clearly, you know, the state Senate and legislators have empowered the Department of Agriculture to really figure out what is the strategy, what is the business plan, what does the model look like to ensure food resiliency. And without that direction, all the different players, both on the private sector side as well as our nonprofit organizations like Farmers Union, need a direction. So as Vince has alluded to, those discussions are happening. Are they happening as fast as we'd like to, or do we have the models that we're leveraging off of to ensure that, you know, we're not guessing at this stuff? So I think that's really the component here.
So question, how do we get Alan Oshima, good guy, recovery and resilience team, to give farming and food the priority they need to have?
Well, we have a matrix that we're giving to them. We're working on having, because I sit on that working group, to have everybody sign on to it, Department of Ag, and also CTAR, and now we're finding out how they can or can't in this respect. You know, government's a funny thing. It's supposed to be we the people, for the people, by the people, but it's a different dynamic. I think going forward though, with what we have, and I'm not here to bash anybody, I feel like I'm as responsible for the solution as anybody. I think what we need to do moving forward is work with what we have. Give you a case in point here on Maui, we have deer, goats, and pigs that are wild. If we were to manage that population, 9 out of 10 deer they cull are pregnant. I mean, it's like this amazing sustainable system of protein that's available here on the island that's causing havoc for our farmers. You know, so manage that protein in a way that we can best feed the people of Hawaii, and then also aggregate and distribute all the food that's here within the state. We have an amazing amount of food existing. If we were to take stock of all that food, you know, people would be blown away. It's just not getting in the hands of the people that need it. So that's really a big component here, I feel, is to aggregate and be able to distribute, have that kind of a system in place. Subsidize young brothers in law cargo to move this food around. Let's take some of that COVID money and put it towards subsidies. And that's in our matrix, by the way, to do that. So we'll hope that Oshima's committee, who don't have any farmers on it, by the way, Farm Bureau is there, but that's the executive director of Farm Bureau. He's not a farmer. I'd like to get my voice or another farmer's voice to talk turkey to these guys about what it really means to make a living at farming. You can only think what it means unless you experience it. So come work on my farm for a week, and then after there's or a month, and then afterwards you might have a general idea about, holy crap, this is no cake on the walk, walk in the park.
So Vince K, how do we get the people who really need to be behind, have the power, the resources behind this for farming and food?
It always comes down to empathy. I think, as we try to second guess or think about the challenges farmers face, and I'm definitely one, as Mina said, I'm definitely one who lacked that empathy. But once you start learning and seeing, once you start doing some of that soil work and you start understanding and seeing why, or some of the positives of looking at regenerative agriculture and for resilience, Vince is right. It's literally about saying, okay, it always comes down to economic impact. So the state, through this recovery, can focus on infrastructure for cold storage. I've got many farming mentors, including Vince Mina, but as Richard Haas always said, if the farmers make money, they'll farm. But when you have the highest kilowatt per hour in the country, cold storage is one of the biggest challenges, which is why food aggregation and food hubs is so crucial to these farmers. If Dean Okimoto was spending over 10 grand a month on cold storage, which is a big challenge, and Dean was one of the best farmers in Waimanalo, which is the region that we're looking at, he needs help. We need to support these farmers. So we challenge the state, come help us, identify the data, let's work together.
That's right.
And let's do it strategically and collaboratively.
Yeah,
that's right.
And we need to get the people with that power behind this.
And Chuck, buy local. Get people to really, that's what we're hoping with this. We're hoping that the people that are now pivoted to getting these CSA boxes will be so addicted to locally produced food. They'll go, oh my God, we love the taste and how long it lasts and all that, that they'll continue to buy once we go back to quasi, whatever that norm is going to be.
Yeah, and that's a good point. We need to get not just the Alan Wongs and the Roys and Peter Merrimans and those guys. We need to get the A and Bs, the KSBEs, those guys with the power and the resources behind this. And the other thing we need to do, I think, if I'm hearing you guys right, is we need an image where elementary school kids and middle school kids can listen to everything you two just said, understand it, and go into the kitchen with mom and dad and say, you know what, I get it. We need to do this. We need to buy.
Chuck's 7 years old. I grew lettuce out in my front yard in Philadelphia and outside of Rohome. I brought it into my mother. I harvested, brought it into my mother. I was blown away. It was on the kitchen table that night for our salad. So that's what got me hooked. So you're absolutely right. Getting our children that innate intelligence that they have within them, bringing that out. That's what education is, to draw out. It doesn't mean to pour a bunch of information in. So that's what we really need to do too. And there's a great farm school garden network that's happening throughout the state. There's some beautiful work that's occurring right now. It's not all gloom and doom. There's a lot of good work. It's just that we need, our leadership to work together. And that's always been the problem. Governor and legislature, they're too busy going back and forth, and the people are forgotten about, so it really needs that kind of leadership to collaborate and cooperate with one another.
Absolutely. Okay, any wrap-up thoughts, Vincent? Vince?
I think the one thing that I keep coming to in terms of scalable business models is, and again, the Dutch are amazing because the country the size of Rhode Island, the second largest food producer in the world. So how they've been supporting the education, empowering, younger future generations to take an interest in soil health and plant health and general, how those microbes are working in our gut, that's going to be the core of it all. And, one thing that Professor Woody Myers, who manages one of the largest enterprise zones in Holland, he explained to me when he came to Hawaii and spoke to some of our key decision makers. He said, okay, I'm hearing amazing stuff at Ma'o farms everywhere around the state. He said, where's your plan? Where's it all linked together? Because you'll reach a point where all that money is competing for the same funds. And if we only have 0.4% of it, it's like, well, how does it all feed together? How does it link all up? So we need that statewide plan.
That's right.
We need that statewide plan.
And it's a plan about a whole system of agriculture. And I have a whole system of agriculture occurring here on 2,500 square feet. You get it right on the small scale, you can do it on any scale. And part of that whole system of agriculture is cold storage. I'm putting a crop in my chill this Friday that I can't cut on Friday because I don't have a market for it. Can you believe it? I don't have a market for it. And yet there's people throughout the state that would love to have it. But I'm putting that in the chill. I'm not going to harvest it because I have the opportunity. I have a walk-in chill. I put it in the chill. I harvest it on Monday morning. So that enabled me to not have to soak today for next Friday. You see, it's a 7-day crop that I have. And so I can adjust accordingly as the markets go up and down and such, right? So that's what we need to have, is a whole system of agriculture that's light on its feet, that's able to adjust as to the markets, but also be able to give farmers the ability to farm, to support farmers' ability to farm, because we want to feed people. When we're running on all cylinders, we give freely. When we're impacted like this, where we have disruptions in our ability to produce, then you're squeezing the farmer if you go to him and go, oh, give me, we have needy people, we need to feed people. Well, you don't want to choke the farmer. You want the farmer to stay in business. So that's basically it.
Yeah. Vince, I think you hit the nail on the head. We have a governor who's a very skilled, knowledgeable, gifted engineer. If you could put together a flow chart for him, speak to him in his language, I bet you would get buy-in you've never seen.
I agree.
Cool.
I completely agree.
I like that.
It's all a matter of communication. We're all human beings. We're all in this together. But we have to be audience conscious, right? The communication has to be tailored for the people who need to understand it and believe it. And here's my final words. People, take your kids out in the backyard, out onto the lanai, with a little planter box or whatever. Start to grow it. Start to understand it. Start to believe in it. Make it part of your life. Vince, thank you so much. It's all about
Aloha.
connection.